Be bored in the debate. The Chair doesn't need to step up. I call Carmel Sepuloni.
Mr Chair, it's very difficult to have to endure the one-liners that come out of the Minister of Social Development's mouth. We get them over and over again with regards to the need for sole parents to step up. And actually, Mr Speaker, Mr Chair, I think we on this side of the House see on a daily basis single mothers, particularly out there, that are stepping up, that are doing everything that they need to be doing and all that they can do for their children. But unfortunately, that side of the House, that Minister of Social Development, would rather drag them through the mud and further stigmatise them and further put out a stigma to society that these people are somehow ripping off the system. And Mr Speaker, Mr Chair, we wouldn't say on this side of the House that everybody out there that has at any point in time accessed welfare, that they have all been all above board. There have been the few occasions where they haven't. But Mr Speaker, Mr Chair, we cannot assume that these women who are barely able to survive on the amount of money that they receive from welfare, that they are in some way ripping off the system. And instead, Mr Chair, what we would hope is that as a parliament that we would actually be supportive of these women. Now, we listened to the Minister of Social Development talk about a few things, including the exemptions that can be applied to different circumstances with regards to these women that are accessing the DPB. And I want to talk about a couple of those exemptions, Mr Chair, because there were some concerns that were raised during Select Committee, and we did discuss them, and I think it's important that we discuss them in this House. Now, one of the exemptions is with respect to study, Mr Chair. Now, the concern that we on this side of the House have is that the exemption is only for level 4 and higher. Now, many of these people that are accessing the domestic purposes benefit did not necessarily achieve secondary school qualifications, Mr Chair. And so to assume that either they go straight out into the workforce or that they go straight into level 4 study is a little bit negligent, Mr Chair, because what we need to be ensuring is that if they decide to go and study, that they can in fact pathway through the necessary stages rather than just get thrown into the deep end at level 4. So that is one of the concerns that has arisen. Now, Mr Chair, it is strange when you look back on the training incentive allowance and look at the changes that have been made there, the very heavy-handed cuts that have been made there, because I'm saying here that with regards to this bill, the exemption is only for level 4 or above study, but with the training incentive allowance, these days you can only access it if you're doing level 1, 2 or 3. So it's almost like absolutely pointless having the training incentive allowance at all. It makes no sense for it to even be in place, because I don't understand who will be actually eligible to access it, given what this bill is proposing with regards to the exemption around study. The other exemption that has been given to us from the officials that we've been advised of, that we've discussed in detail, has been that around the circumstances of women who are exiting violent relationships. Now, Mr Chair, when we discussed that, we talked about whether or not the case managers would necessarily be equipped to deal with the individual circumstances of these, again, I say women because it predominantly is, of these women that come into their offices. And the thing, Mr Chair, and I did ask a couple of the women's groups this when they came through, what women, or how many women, would actually walk in to a case manager that they don't know, and keep in mind that the whole case management load has changed as well, and so you won't necessarily have the same case manager. How many will walk in and feel comfortable enough to actually say to them, I am coming to get the domestic purposes benefit, I am exiting a violent relationship? Now, it's not something that the case manager is actually going to necessarily ask about, and you can understand why. But we also have to understand that many of these women aren't actually going to feel comfortable necessarily divulging their information straight away, nor would they know that it would even be a criteria for exemption from work testing in the first place. It's not like there's a sign-up that instructs them of what the exemptions may be. So there's serious flaws, Mr Chair, with regards to this bill, including the exemptions that the Minister of Social Development earlier, Mr Chair. Mr Chair.
Carmel Cipollone.
Including the exemptions, Mr Chair, that the Minister of Social Development was talking to earlier. And these are things that do need to be looked at further, but unfortunately we've come out of the Select Committee process and they were not paid enough attention at all. And so what we're going to have are exemptions that actually don't achieve what they were meant to achieve, Mr Chair. Now, Mr Chair, I've talked about study, I've talked about violence. The number one concern that arose from this bill was the fact that it discriminates based on gender, marital status and family status. And that is not us on this side of the House making that claim, Mr Chair. That was the Attorney-General that came out, that wrote a report and said that from the get-go with respect to this legislation. And it is a sad, sad day when we will allow a piece of legislation that discriminates on on the basis of those three things, and we will allow that to go through as if there's nothing wrong. Now, as my colleague from the Green Party, Materia Tude, said earlier, she has come from a background where she accessed the domestic purposes benefit as a single mother. So has the Minister of Social Development. So have I, Mr Chair. And all of us know that actually there are a lot of challenges that come with attempting to raise children by yourself when you are a single parent. And actually, Mr Chair, to boot them while they're down by allowing legislation to go through that discriminates them, that stigmatises them further to society is just something that is completely unjust, and you wonder what kind of parliament you're part of when a piece of legislation like that would be allowed to go through. Now, Mr Chair, in the last few days actually, I've had two single parents from West Auckland come through my office. One of them, in fact, had a New Zealand Herald article written about her in the paper this morning. Now, this woman is studying at an Auckland tertiary institution. She's trying to raise her 12-year-old daughter by herself. And Mr Chair, the article discussed the fact that she has gone from size 10 to size 6 because she has to sacrifice eating in order to pay the bills, in order to raise her daughter. And Hekia Parata is laughing about that, Mr Chair. And I actually have met this woman, and it actually is a true story. And I've actually seen her for myself and heard her story firsthand. And perhaps Hekia Parata should read that story in the New Zealand Herald article, because it is a sad...
Point of order, Hekia Parata.
Mr Chair, I don't actually know what the standing order is, but since I wasn't laughing at what the member was speaking about, I object to being attributed with that.
Well, can I just explain to the member that's not the way in which you address that. If the member has been misrepresented, misquoted at the end of it, you quite often stand up and take a personal statement, ask for leave for a personal statement, but I think it's unnecessary now. The point has been made. I call Carmel Cipollone to continue. She has 2 minutes and 14 seconds to go.
Thank you, Mr Chair. And the one thing that this single mother who's gone from a size 10 to a size 6 because she's been sacrificing food so that she can pay the bills and raise her daughter said was that if the government had just left well enough alone and left the training incentive allowance in place, then she would have been able to survive quite adequately. That would have been about $3,800 a year that she would have had access to. And here's this woman who is exactly right. She's getting a science degree. She has actually, and it's mentioned in the article as well, her husband, the father of her daughter, was violent. She came out of a violent relationship. She's trying to better herself. She's trying to get ahead so that she can, when she goes out into the workforce, get a job that will provide an adequate income for her and her daughter, as well as what she's trying to do is role model to her daughter that this is what it's about. It is all about getting a good education. Mum can do it, and you, of course, will be able to do it as well. And yet that government would deny them of things like the training incentive allowance and make life even harder for them down the track with respect to the welfare reforms that they're looking to push through. Mr Chair, I've sat on the Select Committee and I've listened to the submissions, and the vast majority of the submissions that came through on this bill were opposed to this bill. The vast majority of the submissions that came from our social services, our church organisations, were opposed